Well, back on Christmas night in 1972 from a little house in Bermuda, I took a look through a telescope. I'd wanted one since I'd seen one in a camera store just a couple of months earlier. And I took the telescope out and I pointed it at a star, which if you've ever looked at a telescope, at a star through a telescope, you realize that it looks exactly like a star, only a little bit brighter. But the second thing I looked at looked like a star, but actually what I saw was this. And it was the smallness of it. It was Saturn in a low power telescope with just enough magnification to be able to show the rings there in clarity, and that tiny little BB set in the middle of these rings, and I simply couldn't believe it was real.
Wow.
And from that moment on, I was absolutely hooked on astronomy. Absolutely hooked. And by the way, I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and ladies and gentlemen, this is your right angle about the golden age of astronomy that you and I all live in. No one else ever has, and no one else ever will. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, I got a job at the Miami Planetarium when I was 13, and Mariner 9 had just gone to Mars. Here's some of the pictures of Mars from Mariner 9. Now, you have to understand that these are tremendous pictures. These are better than pictures that could be taken from Earth-based telescopes. And then, of course, came the Pioneer 10 and 11 missions. Here's Jupiter from Pioneer 10 or 11. And this is a Pioneer view of Saturn. And we were gobsmacked. We were absolutely flabbergasted. We'd never seen anything like it before, ever. And some years went by, and then next thing you know, Voyager gets out there. Better pictures of Jupiter, better pictures of Saturn, and we get Neptune and Uranus thrown in for the bargain. Uranus and Neptune in the correct order, I guess. So those were all new and interesting. Then Galileo goes to Jupiter and takes a whole new set of pictures that were just gobsmacking in their amazing quality and just breathtaking detail. Then Cassini went to Saturn, and then New Horizons went to Pluto. We did comet missions. We did the Giotto mission to Halley's Comet, I should say, and we did Deep Impact, where we crashed onto a comet and lit up the sky. We saw something happen in the universe that was visible to the naked eye that we caused. That was cool. We had asteroid missions to Gaspra and Ida that were seen by Galileo on the way to Jupiter. We didn't know what they looked like. We had no idea. We thought they looked like maybe the moons around Mars, but we didn't know. We did a lot of time on the asteroid Eros. Spectacular pictures. Hayabusa mission went to Comet Otokawa. And then the Dawn mission just went from Vesta to Ceres. Now, I'm bringing all this up right now because on Friday, the 15th of September, the Cassini probe, after, 16 years or something in orbit, and a 20-year mission, maybe 13 years in orbit, a 20-year mission from start to finish, finally burned up in the atmosphere intentionally. Just before they crashed it into the atmosphere, they swung it through the rings of Saturn and showed us the most amazing views of a planet that I saw as a tiny little speck, a little BB inside a little washer. And now I'm looking at gravity waves on the rings, and I'm looking at meters of 20, 30 yards across resolution, little mountains, sharp edge ridges on the rings. And I bring all of this up to say basically one thing. And I was just wondering if I could get you guys' take on it. Scott, I'd said that we'd never lived like this before, and we will never live like this again. And what I mean by that is this. Up until the point when I basically got my telescope, just by happy coincidence, I'm not saying I caused it, I'm just saying I just got lucky. But prior to me, everyone's view of the universe was as good as it could be through the best telescope. When I was a kid, that was a 200-inch telescope at Mount Palomar. Before that, it was a 100-inch telescope. But blurry, nasty images through the atmosphere, and everybody who'd ever looked into the sky prior to me at that time had seen only telescopic images of these planets. Neptune and Uranus were little tiny colored dots. Pluto was a speck on a photographic plate. So I got to see what these things looked like. That's awesome. But what's even more awesome, although a little bit sad, is anybody who gets into this from now on will never have had the experience of being gobsmacked by these discoveries of the last 40 years of the golden age of astronomy, because they will have grown up with the high-resolution pictures from Galileo and Cassini and so on. So this is a unique age in the history of humanity. It's never happened before, won't happen again. How do you feel about the sense of being able to keep looking a little bit deeper into things that seemed unknowable and in the future will be common knowledge?
Yeah, in a sense, it is. I'd hate to think that the age of awe and wonder is dead, and past. And I do think we'll discover. I mean, we see even now pictures of distant, galaxies that still, the Horsehead Nebula kind of thing that just still have the ability to captivate us. But while you were saying that, it occurred to me, like, there have been times when I was out in the woods with a pair of binoculars and I saw something in the distance, a deer or something like that, but I couldn't get a really good look at it. So I would stalk up closer to it and get a look at it. But when I had my little telescope, and it was a little telescope, I was like, by the way, I got my telescope by like going door to door selling greeting cards in a neighborhood that had only 12 houses. And so, because I could not sell enough greeting cards, I think my grandparents actually kicked in the difference and paid for the telescope. But you can only, like, even with the best telescope from Earth, you're only going to get a certain view of these distant orbs. But whoever got the idea said, hey, why don't we put the telescope like 1,000 miles away from the planet and see what it looks like from there? I just think that's just an awesome notion. In a way, these exploratory vessels that you listed, and there are more of them than I think I remembered. It's like Sacagawea for future generations. This is the Native American guide who knew a little bit about the territory and was able to go before us. And then when Lewis and Clark come back and they can say, okay, this is what it looks like, and after the Mississippi you're going to see this, and if you get up, follow the Columbia River up to the northwestern coast, and you can get all the way through to the Pacific Ocean. They have blazed a trail with all these vessels, for which I hope future generations are going to benefit from this. And those future generations will probably stand on the shoulders of people like Musk and Bezos and Branson.
But they'll never have the wonder of it. They'll never, ever have the sense of dying to see something. I can't wait to see something. Let me live long enough to see this thing. And then, ta-da, there it is. Now, Steve Scott mentioned the Hubble Space Telescope. And Hubble was doomed to be canceled many years ago, and they just decided it's working. Let's keep it going. What's the matter with you people? Cassini was crashed on purpose, presumably to stop a contamination of it if it had crashed into one of the moons and potentially life form there and so on. But I think that's nonsense. I think they put him into the planet because they want to give him a Viking funeral. I really do. Right. And so here's the thing that interests me, Steve. This doesn't really apply to Hubble, but it does apply to all of the other pioneers and vanguards and explorers and voyagers and all the rest. We tend to humanize them. We talk about them as if they're people. We say things like Cassini deserved a good end, and Galileo, whose antenna jammed, was a soldier, and Galileo just hung in there, and we talk about them. The rovers on Mars, the Spirit and Opportunity that I think their original lifetime was supposed to be 90 days, and we got 10 years out of them. These kind of things, and we constantly think, those tough little guys, or those, I mean, on one hand, they're toasters, really, right? but on another, they're not. They're not, because these mechanical inventions, these products of our minds and our imagination and our hands, allows us to take our consciousness to places that we never, ever could have imagined. And the one thing we learned about all of these probes, Steve, and everything that's ever come back, without exception, has been that the place has always been far more interesting than we thought it would be, that the universe is not only stranger than we imagined, but it's stranger than we can imagine.
I love that. Listen, Glenn Reynolds republished a column of his, it's got to be 14, 15 years old now, about how we could have had Cassini at Saturn back in 1970 if we'd have gone with nuclear propulsion. And he made a great point that, we're still using these chemical rockets that take forever to get there. But I kind of wondered, if we'd have gotten there in 1970, what kind of information, what kind of pictures would we be able to transmit back to Earth? And the answer is, well, they wouldn't have been very good, because we were just barely out of the age when our spy satellites dropped film canisters back to Earth that then had to be recovered by the NSA, and the film developed in an NSA lab. So really, sending a probe that far out that early wouldn't have brought back these amazing pictures. But now you think, Cassini was launched in 1997 with technology was probably from 1994 and 1995 and was still able to transmit these amazing images. So you think about what the probes that are going to be launched in the next few years, what those are going to be able to deliver back to us. It's going to be, you think it's breathtaking now, it's going to be even more breathtaking. And if it does eventually become a little humdrum, well, look at it this way. If it becomes humdrum to our robot eyes, then it's not going to be that much longer until people, human beings, follow the robots, follow the probes, and set foot on these worlds, on these neighbors of ours here in the solar system. Because what becomes humdrum is eventually where people go. It's what we do. It's in this beautiful, crazy nature of ours to go to the places where our eyes can see. And you know what? If nothing else, we're going to have to establish some outposts. Not just we don't have all of our eggs in one basket, as others have said, but somebody's got to get really far out there and get those Voyager probes back to Earth before one of them becomes self-aware as V'ger and threatens the existence of the planet.
The clock is ticking. It's just a matter of
it's just a matter of time.
Just a matter of time. Just the fact that we would put something that could be read by people on a probe like the Voyagers or the Pioneers, when the chances it's incalculable how small.
But that's the fact that we did kind of crazy we are, Bill.
That's the kind of crazy we are. Yeah. You throw a message in a bottle, and sometimes they come home. I'm not entirely sure about whether or not we're going to follow in their footsteps, but I do know this: we are living in a golden age and an absolutely magical time for things like this. And when Cassini went into the atmosphere, a little animation here. Some of the animations look so good; they're almost like the real thing. But it's beautiful and glorious and sad to see that thing just coming down from the rings on fire, and to think that we sent that there, and it's resting in Saturn somewhere in the middle of this. Saturn's about as dense as a milkshake, so somewhere in there is the Cassini probe, and it'll always be there. But for those of you who think that's the end of another era, well, guess what? It wasn't too long ago that Juno got to Jupiter. That's the latest probe in orbit around Jupiter. Just checking out on this Cassini story, I took a look for some Juno pictures, and I'm about to show you some pictures taken from Juno. The color's been exaggerated a little bit for clarity. But once again, after 40 years, 45 years of being gobsmacked by these discoveries, take a look at these and sit there in wonder and thank God that you got to live in a time where you could look at a picture like this and have it simply take your breath away, because it's never happened before and it's never going to happen again. For everybody here at BillWhittle.com, thank you so much for joining us. This show's made possible by the paying members at BillWhittle.com. We'd love to have you as part of the family. I'm Bill Whittle with Steve Green and Scott Ott. We'll see you next week on Right Angle.